All right, buckle up because this deep dive, it takes us straight into the fascinating and sometimes unsettling world of serial murder investigations.
Yeah, we're going way beyond the headlines. Those oversimplified TV tropes.
Right, right. And our guide for this incredible FBI document, it's called Serial Murder, Multi-Disciplinary Perspectives for Investigators. It's really like a crash course straight from 135 specialists who all came together at this FBI symposium. Detectives, forensic experts, even media folks, they've seen it all.
Yeah, and they really wanted to create this resource that cuts through all the myths we see in the media and gives investigators like this practical knowledge that's based on real-world cases.
Okay, so let's jump right into one of those myths. This idea that serial killers are all easy to spot, like they're all socially awkward loners. Turns out the FBI found that's often not the case at all.
Yeah, it's true. They found that a lot of these individuals maintain shockingly ordinary lives, which is crazy.
It's how they fly under the radar for so long, right? I
Exactly.
mean, think about Robert Yates, a family man, respected pilot. Yates, the guy who was killing women in Washington state while raising a family? How does that compute?
Yeah, and the FBI document actually uses Yates as an example of how a seemingly normal life can make an offender seem so much less suspicious to law enforcement and even their own families. They blend in, which honestly makes those early investigations even trickier.
It's unsettling, to say the least. Speaking of unsettling, let's talk about the definition of serial murder itself. You'd think it would be straightforward, but apparently it's not.
It seems like it should be an easy one to define, but you're right, it's surprisingly complex. I mean, for a long time, there were all these different definitions floating around, even within the FBI.
Hmm.
But this symposium was a chance for them to really clarify things.
Hold on, the FBI had their own definition.
They did. Back in the late 90s, a law was passed that actually included a very specific definition of serial killing, but it was only meant for that particular law. And it just created so much confusion in the following years.
That makes sense. So, what's the official verdict now? How does the FBI define a serial killer in this document?
Okay, so it's 2 or more murders committed by the same offender in separate events.
Separate events, that feels key.
It is. That distinction really sets it apart from other things like mass shootings or even things like terrorism.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about those cases where someone commits multiple murders close together, like over a few days? Isn't that a spree killing?
You're talking about spree killing, which is where the lines get really blurry. Traditionally, spree killing hinged on this idea of a cooling off period between murders, which is tough to define.
And I'm guessing that cooling off period is where things get really subjective.
Yeah, you got it. I mean, how long? It's long enough to be cooled off. Hours,
Yeah.
days, weeks. It gets arbitrary so fast, which is why the FBI, along with many experts, has really moved away from using spree killing as like a distinct category. It's just
Yeah.
not that useful for real-world investigations.
Right. It's almost like you're trying to nail down a specific definition for chaos. It's messy by nature.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what creates that chaos. What makes a serial killer? Is it something in their DNA, their childhood? What did these 135 experts have to say about that?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Ah,
And they all agree that there's no single cause. It's not a gene, not a specific upbringing. It's way more complicated than that. They actually refer to it as a rare confluence of factors.
so what does that even mean? A rare confluence?
That means you kind of have this perfect storm of potential contributors, biological predispositions, psychological makeup, social experiences. Each case is this unique puzzle where those factors combine in all these different ways.
So someone could have all the so-called risk factors and never hurt a fly. It's not a guarantee.
Exactly. And that's where the element of choice comes in. The experts were very clear about this, even with all those factors at play. Ultimately, it comes down to an individual's choice to kill.
That's a chilling thought. It really throws a wrench in those theories that try to simplify serial killers down to a single gene or a single traumatic event.
It does, yeah. Because while those things might play a role, they don't dictate someone's destiny. And that's especially relevant when we start talking about psychopathy, which is a topic that's often misunderstood when it comes to serial killers.
Psychopathy is definitely one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot. So let's break it down. Is it just another word for psycho? Are we talking about someone who's just crazy?
Well, not quite. Psychopathy is a distinct personality disorder, and the experts were very careful to point out that not all psychopaths are violent, and certainly not all become criminals.
So it's not as simple as those crime dramas make it seem.
Not even close. We're talking about a specific cluster of traits: lack of empathy and remorse, manipulative tendencies, superficial charm, impulsivity, a constant need for stimulation. They're wired so differently, and they also operate outside the bounds of what we consider normal social behavior.
Okay, so how does that play into serial murder investigations?
Well, not all serial killers are psychopaths, and vice versa. But the FBI document stresses that for those offenders who are psychopathic, understanding those personality traits can be incredibly valuable during an investigation.
So knowing a potential killer might be psychopathic could give investigators a sort of psychological edge during an interrogation.
Exactly. The document actually highlights cases where investigators use flattery and even appeal to a psychopathic killer's vanity to get confessions.
Wow, that's incredible. Playing mind games with a master manipulator.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
But it really highlights how crucial it is to understand the mind of the offender, even if that mind is wired very differently from our own. And that actually leads us to another concept the FBI dives into: motive. It seems like with serial killers, motive is always this big mystery.
Right. It's like you're always trying to figure out the why behind these horrific acts. What did the FBI have to say about understanding motive in these cases?
Well, the FBI actually cautions against getting too hung up on motive, at least in those early stages of an investigation.
Really? Why is that? I would think knowing why someone is killing would be like the first step to catching them.
It can be, yeah, eventually.
Mm-hmm.
But the FBI emphasizes that fixating on a specific motive early on can really backfire. Imagine you're so focused on finding a suspect who fits a certain profile,
Yeah.
let's say they're driven by financial gain, and then you overlook evidence pointing to someone with a completely different motive.
So it's like having tunnel vision.
Yeah.
You're so focused on one thing that you miss the bigger picture.
Exactly. The FBI stresses the importance of remaining open to different possibilities and focusing on the behavior at the crime scene, the patterns, the MO. That's where the real clues often lie. They even categorize serial killers based on behavioral patterns rather than specific motives.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does that work? What kind of categories are we talking about here?
They use categories like anger, criminal enterprise, financial gain, ideology, power and thrill, psychosis, and sexually based. But they also stress that these are just broad categories, and that a killer's motives can be complex, a mix of these, or even something entirely unique.
So those categories are more like starting points, not the finish line of understanding why someone might become a serial killer.
Exactly. The why is important, but it can be a moving target. The document really emphasizes that understanding how the methods, the patterns, that's what often leads to catching the killer. And to do that effectively, you need seamless collaboration.
Because these cases often span multiple jurisdictions, right? It's not just one town's problem.
You got it.
Yeah.
You've got all these different agencies, city, county, state, even federal, all with their own procedures. Without coordination, things can fall apart quickly. The FBI really hammers home the importance of a strong task force structure, solid leadership, and open communication between everyone involved.
So give me the inside scoop. What did these experts say about keeping these complex investigations from going off the rails?
Well, first and foremost, you need a small, agile team of seasoned investigators, not a massive group with every detective in the state.
Too many cooks in the kitchen.
Exactly. The document actually points to cases like the Green River Killer investigation, which involved so many agencies and investigators that it created a logistical nightmare.
It seems counterintuitive, but I guess when you're dealing with a complex investigation, sometimes less is more.
Precisely. The FBI emphasizes quality over quantity. You want experienced homicide detectives who know their stuff, who can work independently, but also come together as a cohesive unit. And those investigators need a strong leader who can manage not just the case itself, but also the inevitable pressure from politicians, the media, and even anxieties within their own departments.
It sounds like the task force leader needs to be a master chess player, strategist, and diplomat all rolled into one.
That's a great way to put it. They need to make tough decisions, keep everyone focused, and shield the investigation from outside influences that could derail it. And they need to be incredibly organized, because another thing the FBI stresses is the sheer volume of data generated by these cases.
Right, we're talking tips, reports, forensic data. It's like trying to drink from a fire hose.
Exactly. That's why they dedicated an entire section to data management, emphasizing the need for effective systems and trained analysts from day one.
So they're not just number crunchers in the basement. They're actually part of the investigative team.
Absolutely. They help make sense of all the chaos, spot patterns, and connect the dots that might otherwise be missed.
Did they mention any specific tools or techniques for managing all that information?
They did. They highlighted things like timelines, geographical mapping, and even creating visual representations of the data, like charts, graphs, anything to help investigators see the bigger picture. And they specifically mentioned a few key systems.
Okay, hit me with the acronyms.
Well, they emphasized NLTs, which is the National Law Enforcement Teletype System. Think of it as a nationwide information sharing network for law enforcement.
So that helps agencies share information about potential leads and suspects across state lines.
Exactly. They also talked about VICAP. That's the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, which is specifically designed to analyze violent crimes, including serial murders, to identify patterns and links between cases.
That sounds like a crucial resource for these kinds of investigations. What about the analysis of physical evidence? DNA, fingerprints?
That's where things get really interesting. The document talks about how advancements in forensic science have revolutionized these investigations, but they also caution against what they call the CSI effect.
Oh, you mean the idea that every case can be solved with a magic wand in 45 minutes?
Exactly. In reality, forensic science is meticulous, time-consuming work, and while it's an invaluable tool, it's not a guaranteed shortcut to catching a killer.
Makes sense. So what are some of the key forensic tools they highlighted in the document?
They spent a lot of time talking about DNA analysis and the use of CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System.
Right, CODIS. That's where they can compare crime scene DNA to a national database, right?
Okay. Exactly. It's like a giant fingerprint file, but for DNA. And just like they have AFIS for fingerprints, they now have NIBIN, the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, which allows them to compare ballistic evidence from crime scenes. It's amazing how much technology has changed the game.
It's like those killers are leaving digital breadcrumbs everywhere they go, even if they don't realize it. But what about the less high-tech stuff? I'm thinking fibers, hair, those tiny details that you sometimes hear about breaking cases wide open.
You're right, those seemingly insignificant traces of evidence can be critical, and the FBI knows it. They call them trace elements, and they can be anything: fibers, hair, paint chips, soil samples.
It sounds like incredibly painstaking work, analyzing those kinds of details.
It is, which is why the FBI emphasizes the importance of having dedicated forensic experts involved in these investigations from the very beginning.
Do they give any examples of how these trace elements have actually helped solve serial murder cases?
They do. They highlight the case of Richard Evans, who killed 3 young girls in Virginia.
What happened in that case?
Evans was eventually caught because of fibers found at his home in South Carolina, fibers that matched those found on his victims in Virginia years earlier.
Years. That's incredible. What kind of fibers are we talking about here?
Everything from carpet fibers to fibers from a bath mat, an Afghan, even the trunk of his car. They also found latent fingerprints belonging to one of the victims inside his car, fingerprints that had been there for 5 years.
It's amazing how these tiny details, things you might not even notice in your day-to-day life, can end up being the key to solving a crime. It's like those investigators were piecing together a giant puzzle, one tiny fiber at a time.
That's a great way to put it. And that meticulous approach is crucial not just for catching the killer, but also for building a solid case for prosecution.
Right, because it's not enough to just catch the killer. You need to be able to convict them in a court of law.
Exactly. And that's why the FBI emphasizes the importance of a strong partnership between law enforcement and the prosecutor's office.
So the prosecutor isn't just waiting in the wings for a finished case. They're involved from the beginning.
Ideally, yes. They're advising on legal strategy, helping to navigate those complicated multi-jurisdictional issues, and making sure every piece of evidence is admissible in court. Because as you can imagine, these cases often involve complex legal battles.
I bet those multi-jurisdictional cases are incredibly difficult to prosecute. Different states, different laws. It's like a logistical nightmare.
It can be. The D.C. sniper case is a prime example.
Right. Those shootings span multiple states, creating this massive legal puzzle for prosecutors to solve.
Exactly. John Allen Muhammad, the mastermind behind the D.C. sniper attacks, was ultimately tried and convicted in Virginia. But getting to that point required a massive amount of legal maneuvering and coordination between multiple jurisdictions. It really highlights why having that strong prosecutorial strategy from day one is absolutely essential in these cases.
It's like they're conducting a legal orchestra, making sure everyone is playing the same tune. But even with a perfectly conducted legal strategy, there's one element that can make or break these investigations: the media.
Ah, yes. The double-edged sword of media attention. It can be a powerful tool for investigators, but it can also backfire spectacularly. The FBI dedicated an entire section of this document to navigating the media landscape during a serial murder investigation, and their #1 piece of advice is this: control the narrative.
Control the narrative. So what does that actually look like in a real-world investigation?
Well, it means having like a designated spokesperson for the task force, right? Someone who can handle all the press conferences and stuff, release information strategically, and prevent, those unofficial leaks that can spiral out of control.
So it's about being proactive and managing the flow of information instead of constantly reacting to whatever the media digs up.
Exactly. The FBI actually uses the BTK killer case as a textbook example of how to use media relations strategically.
Mm.
Remember, that case dragged on for decades. And Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, he loved taunting the media and, inserting himself into the narrative.
Didn't he, send those cryptic messages and packages to all the newspapers and TV stations?
He did, yeah. And while it was obviously incredibly frustrating for investigators, the task force eventually used those communications to their advantage. They used press releases to kind of engage with him publicly, appeal to his ego, and even challenge him directly, all while subtly gathering information about him and keeping the case in the public eye.
So it was almost like they were playing a very public game of chess with him, using the media as their board.
It was a high-stakes game, for sure,
Mm.
and it ultimately worked. Those media interactions, all carefully orchestrated by the task force, they played a really significant role in Rader's capture.
That's incredible. It's like they turned the media from this potential liability into an asset. But the document also cautions against the dangers of too much media speculation, right?
Absolutely. The FBI had some particularly strong opinions about those so-called experts who pop up on TV after every high-profile crime.
You mean the ones who claim they can profile a killer from a blurry photo and a gut feeling?
The very same. The document calls out how those kinds of pronouncements, especially when they're not based on solid evidence, can be incredibly damaging.
In what way?
Well, for starters, they can really mislead the public and create this unnecessary fear. But even worse, they can jeopardize the investigation itself. Think about it. If a killer is seeing their crimes analyzed on TV by someone who's just making assumptions and getting things wrong, it might make them more cautious, more likely to destroy evidence, or even worse, more brazen in their actions.
So not only are those so-called experts not helping, they could actually be making things worse for everyone.
Exactly. And that's why the FBI stresses the importance of relying on trained profilers and forensic experts who actually understand the nuances of these cases and are working with the most accurate information.
It's a good reminder that not everything you hear in the media, even from someone who calls themselves an expert, is necessarily accurate or helpful.
Very true.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from debunking those common myths about serial killers to really digging into the complexities of these investigations. What's the biggest takeaway for you? What really stuck with you from this FBI document?
I think what struck me most was just the emphasis on collaboration. These investigations are not a solo mission at all. They require a whole team of really dedicated individuals all working together, sharing information, and using their own unique skills to achieve a common goal.
And not just law enforcement, right? We're talking about forensic experts, prosecutors, analysts, data specialists. Even the media, when used strategically, can play a vital role.
You're absolutely right. It really takes a village to catch a killer, as they say. And even then, there are no guarantees.
That's a sobering thought. We've talked a lot about all the tools and techniques, but at the end of the day, this is still a very human endeavor, both the good guys and the bad guys.
It is. And that brings us to, I think, our final thought for this deep dive. While this document provides all these incredible insights into catching serial killers, it also reminds us that there are countless victims whose stories we never hear, whose cases go unsolved.
That's a heavy thought to end on, but an important one. It reminds us that while we've made progress, there's still so much work to be done to understand, prevent, and solve these horrific crimes.
I agree. And it challenges all of us to ask ourselves, how can we as a society do better? How can we support victims, recognize those warning signs, and create a world where these kinds of tragedies are less likely to occur?
Those are questions worth pondering. So, to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this is giving you a new perspective on this complex and often disturbing subject. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.